Timothy's going to talk about really why organizations misidentify successors. There is people put people up on a pedestal maybe they shouldn't be. We're going to talk about a 4-step succession planning process that is tied to your strategy. So kind of another unique way of looking at this. And then finally, how to measure readiness and build your talent pools out. Help your company succeed and move into the future.
Wonderful. So let's dive in. And I'd like to start here with a statistic. So we know that managers typically misidentify the right talent for succession about 50% of the time. So it's about a coin flip in terms of whether they're getting this correct. Andy, I know you had some stats here you wanted to share.
Yeah, you know what? It's whenever we talk about succession planning and trying to find the right people, as an NFL fan, I'm constantly looking for my team to find the right people. Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan, lived in Tampa area for quite a while. We have not done a good job of it. Last year, yes, maybe, but the future will tell. But I found it interesting that over the last 10-year period, there's been roughly 315 first-round draft picks. And it almost kind of falls right in line with your number there. 46% or 144 first-round draft picks have been bust. So in a league that's driven by accumulating past performance, looking at game films, looking at how fast do they run the 40, how much do they bench press, all the different things that get talked about for months and months and months up to the draft, there's almost a 50% failure rate. So managing performance may not be the way to look at it. Managing what they've done in the past may not be the way to look at it. To give you an example in the business world, in the past 5 years, Yahoo has had 6 CEOs. What happened? What went wrong? HP had a CEO that only lasted for 6 months. And if you look at some of the long-term studies, Harvard, and once again we're talking about CEOs, Harvard Business Review has discovered that 2 out of 5 CEOs fail in the first 18 months. So as people are doing the succession planning and trying to figure out who's going to be plugged in where, maybe it's not quite as easy as we think it is.
Right, absolutely. It's certainly not as easy as it seems. And so before we dive into kind of where we're going with succession planning and how to adapt or modify our approach to be more successful, I think we should focus first on where we're going wrong with the current model and the current processes that we use. So let's dive into that in terms of why do we misidentify talent. So we know that the far majority of succession planning or talent review decisions are largely based on managers' ratings. And this is first and foremost one of the problems with succession planning decisions and talent review decisions, because we know that managers' ratings are almost accurate. So they have about 48% chance of getting it wrong. Again, about 50% chance here of getting it right. So why might that be? And there's a number of reasons why that might be. So Andy, I know you had a previous position overseeing and managing a number of employees. Did you find it easy to find the time to be able to input these ratings? Oftentimes we hear that managers they're really overworked and they just don't have time to be making these ratings. How would that resonate with your experience?
Oh, and I don't know if I should mention the company or not, but where I had some of my biggest responsibility was Xerox Corporation. And at one point, I had 23 direct reports where I had to manage their performance, try to figure out who were going to be our next top folks. It's a challenge. It's a challenge because not only are you trying to do your day-to-day operations and meetings, you're tasked with building out a succession plan. You're tasked with rating people, trying to put some type of, going through, as people call today, calibration sessions to say, okay, here's my top, here's my bottom, where does everybody else fit? And oftentimes, I mean, it really, to me, with some of them, it was a flip of the coin, right? Much as I hate to admit it.
Yeah. And I think that speaks to a lot of managers' experience in terms of being overworked and not really having the time. Or again, when you the calibration training, being kind of undertrained. So people go to school for years and years and years to learn how to observe behavior in an objective and non-biased way. So it's it's perhaps not very realistic for us to think that someone with all these other responsibilities that's already overworked is going to have the capability and the time to be able to really learn and to be trained properly on how to make accurate ratings. And then finally, the last issue we see is a motivation issue. So in an ideal world, we'd hope that managers are motivated to provide the most accurate ratings that they can to increase their employees' self-awareness and help them grow through developmental feedback. But in the real world, managers are often not evaluated on their ability to provide accurate ratings, nor are they rewarded or recognized for this. And they often have, other motivations that are in process, such as avoiding conflict or keeping the peace. Or sometimes managers think that poor ratings of their direct reports are a reflection on them as well. So they're inclined to kind of distort those ratings, thinking that that's going to impact the way that they're perceived. And anything you'd add to the issue of managers' ratings, given that this is a crucial part of the succession planning decisions in most organizations?
My wife is a member of SHRM, and she's a director of HR for a company, and so we have these conversations quite a bit. And I know one of the things she pointed out to me the other day, and this is from the SHRM literature and information that she receives, 95% of managers they're not satisfied with the performance management process. They don't think it's accurate, they don't think it's correct, but more of a let's fill in the box type of exercise, which is sad because it is obviously they're designed to help, but I think they're viewed obviously as a nuisance.
Right. Alrighty, so let's move to the second reason that we also often misidentify talent, and this is, in all fairness, managers often really don't have enough good data to be able to predict potential. So oftentimes past performance is the key metric that we use, as we just discussed. Past performance is not always a great indicator of future performance. Specifically, if we're thinking about a different role or a future position or different strategic priorities, then looking backwards isn't necessarily going to give us all the information that we need for predicting potential. And in all fairness, making predictions is just downright hard. So there's an individual, Philip Tetlock, that's well known for his research on expert predictions, and what he found is that really even experts can't perform a whole lot better than what he called dart-throwing chimps in terms of making consistent predictions. So even simple, basic mathematical algorithms are often more accurate. So it's just a difficult science. It's a difficult thing to do, and even if we are well equipped to do it, making predictions of the future is a difficult thing for many people to do. So let's move now to the third reason, which is the issue is really compounded when we consider this third reason, which is that the relevance to the strategic priorities is often obscure. So when we think about measuring potential, of course we have to define first potential for what. And unless we're defining this in terms of the strategic priorities, which is sometimes very difficult for organizations to do, particularly with individual development plans or individual reviews, then it becomes very hard to answer the question of potential for what. And related to this, we find research suggests that less than 25% of managers think that their development is critical for achieving business goals. So this really suggests that there's clearly a disconnect in terms of the relevance of learning and development for accomplishing strategic priorities. That this is really not clear for most managers. Now we'll move to the fourth reason, the last reason that we'll cover, and that is too much time is spent on the process and not enough on the goal. So we suggest that succession planning, oftentimes in the process of trying to make succession planning decisions, we get really immersed on that process of compiling the ratings, of making sure that we have data to be able to make that decision. But time is, of course, finite. And when we consider that CEOs spend about 11% of their time on talent reviews and succession planning, I'd argue that we really need to maximize the effectiveness of that time, and that our current succession planning processes that most organizations are using is really not maximizing that time, and that there's time that's wasted in that process that could be spent on other areas of the process that are more directly applicable to the goal, which is ultimately to be able to achieve the strategic priorities or the business priorities. So now I'll turn to the traditional succession planning approach. Andy, is there anything you'd like to add to some of these reasons that we commonly misidentify talent before we move to talking about the current talent succession planning approach?
The only thing I can say is, once again, from my past, is I would spend probably 80% of my time on the process. You know, where you're gathering the data, you're putting it down, and it really, you know, ultimately when you look back, when you reflect back on it, how much of what I really put together is going to help me get to my ultimate goal, because oftentimes goals change, and it's kind of a moving target at times. So a lot of times spent on the process, going through the motions, and did it really help? Yeah, I'd say there were a few times it probably did help, and it was accurate, but I'd say other times it can be way too much.
Right. Great. Thanks for adding that. Let's jump in then to talking about that process. So here we have a typical succession planning approach. It's very similar to the talent review process. Oftentimes these are intertwined. And typically, the majority of the time, so the 80% that Andy was just referring to, is spent on these first 3 steps. So calibrating training managers, helping them make accurate ratings, or striving to make accurate ratings, collecting those ratings, analyzing them, populating a 9-box grid, and that's where we see an inordinate amount of time spent, where I argue that the 4th step and the 5th step are actually more key to this process. And that's where, as a result of time being finite, we don't spend as much time because we're spending so much time in these earlier process. So this is where I see really the most opportunity for improvement of this process. So here we have our recommended 4-step succession planning approach. And you can see that this is a bit more simplified as compared to the previous approach. It's a bit more agile, and it's also ideally more aligned with the strategy. So first here is identifying the strategic priorities. All talent management decisions really should start and end with those strategic priorities, and succession planning is really no different in that regard. Secondly, we recommend running nominated individuals, so you can still have managers submitting nominations. Of course, they want to be involved in this process, and they have some valuable information to offer, or quite a bit of valuable information to offer. So allowing them to make nominations for the assessment process can be a great way to still get them included in the process. And then by using an assessment process, it kind of streamlines those first 3 steps in the traditional succession planning model and allows us to spend much more time on facilitating the talent reviews and creating those talent pools and development programs. We can dive into each of these steps in more detail. So the first step, identifying the strategic direction. We recommend following a simple 3-step process to identify strategic priorities. The first is conducting background information on the organization, gathering things such as the organizational size, the structure, characteristics of the industry, maybe the vision, the mission statement, financial performance. A whole host of information can be really applicable here. The second is facilitating stakeholder interviews. So this is key not only for ensuring buy-in and making sure that stakeholders and program sponsors are all on board, but this also helps to, of course, focus the conversation and focus the assessment results and the succession planning around those strategic priorities. So questions that can be asked here are, for example, what are the current or future strategic priorities that the leader needs to support in the next 12 months? Maybe what are the internal challenges that are relevant for this position? What are the leadership priorities that need to be resolved to address a certain problem or a certain need? So really trying to probe what it is that this leader needs to be able to accomplish, or these positions need to be able to accomplish. And then finally, from that information, you can define 2 to 3 of the key strategic priorities.
Hey, Christy, one of the things that I will really kind of, with a lot of publicly traded companies, a lot of this information is obviously very available. It has to be made available. But I've got a couple clients where they're privately held, and believe it or not, the leadership didn't want to share a lot of the goals and things they wanted to accomplish with the organization. So I would recommend, if you can, really you kind of hold your ground a little bit, and when you're talking to your leader, say, look, I really need this information, because you're kind of asking me to put a blindfold on and throw a dart and still asking me to hit the bullseye. So there's times where it may not even seem fair, but don't be afraid to ask those tough questions.
That's a great point. Thanks for adding that, Andy. Another thing we found is sometimes it's really difficult for clients they struggle to concisely define what are the strategic priorities for their leaders. So what you're looking at on this screen is 8 different strategic priorities that we've validated for different levels of leadership. And we find it's really helpful to use this language, or to provide them with this language, to kind of focus the conversation and to help them concretely identify what are the strategic priorities. So sometimes we'll have clients that kind of, in a couple paragraphs explain one of these strategic priorities, and then a sentence, we offer it to them, and it's like an aha moment for them that we were able to offer that so concisely. So this is a great way to help that conversation as well. So moving to the second step, the assessment program. Here I'd really like to emphasize the difference between readiness and potential. So oftentimes this distinction is not made, and I think this is an important distinction to make. So potential here we define as an employee's capacity to assume a higher level leadership position, whereas readiness is really looking at that employee's capacity or their ability to accomplish the strategic priorities or their goals at their current level of leadership. So this is parallel to the distinction of potential being more forward-looking, whereas readiness is more of that in-role assessment. And there are, of course, multiple factors that go into determining each of these. And one of the benefits of using simulation assessment, such as the assessments that we offer, is the ability to actually see potential in a low-risk situation. So for example, if we have a group of managers and we're trying to determine who the next director might be, then we're able to put them in a higher level position in that live simulation so that we can see their actions, we can see their leadership skills in action, but it's still a very low-risk situation in terms of we're not putting them in that director level position, assuming the role and kind of letting them take the reins. We're looking at this while we're making those decisions, which can be really valuable information for determining either readiness or potential.
Christy, I'd like to kind of point out too. Yeah, I was just going to say, one of the things that, as we look across the industry and really pay attention to what's going on, we have discovered now that roughly 10% of Fortune 500 companies have gotten away from the performance review. They've kind of abandoned it in search of potential. And these are companies like Deloitte and Mercer, Adobe, GE. These are not little companies that are doing this. And it's because they have run into the situations we talked about earlier with, unfortunately with failures, with people they thought who were going to succeed who weren't ready. So I think this is kind of something for everybody to keep in the back of their mind, that this is part of kind of the, I guess the term you hear all the time is this part of the new normal, where companies are getting away from performance reviews in search of potential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great addition there as well. So I'll expand on this a little bit more in terms of how we actually link potential and what that means in terms of measuring it as more than just current skills or past performance. So even if we're assessing someone for the next level or their current level, whether that's readiness or potential, there's a number of factors that should be taken into consideration. So at Pinsight, we consider potential as a combination of 4 factors. The first being their current skill level, so we're able to observe what their abilities are currently. The second being their motivation to apply those skills. So we know, I'm sure everyone is familiar with an individual that has strong ability but does not have the motivation to apply it. And so of course motivation is a key component to potential and to applying the skills. The third component here is learning agility. So this comes from really decades of research suggesting that a person's orientation towards learning new skills or behaviors is going to significantly impact both the rate at which they're able to do that, as well as their motivation to do that and their motivation to apply that new skill once they've acquired it. And then finally, we take into account ease of development. So we know that skills vary and how easy or difficult that they are to learn and to develop. So when we're considering potential, we feel it's really important to consider how easy or difficult the skills are that we're asking our individuals to develop. So in the past, companies typically have looked at this very black and white. Either someone's ready now or they're not. And there traditionally hasn't been much emphasis placed on the in-between. So how long is it going to take someone to get ready? And that's really how we create our talent pools, is by making those more precise estimates. So with the software that we have, we're able to break this down into various different readiness estimates. And then again, all of this is tied to the strategic priorities, which allows us to really streamline later steps in this process in terms of the assessment accomplishing much more, providing a more robust picture of the candidate, and then allowing us to directly tie this to the strategic priorities. So what I'm going to do now is transfer over to our system and just show you briefly how this might look in a participant's report. So what you're looking at here is the first screen of our group report. So we have both group and individual reports available for the candidates that go through this. And up here at the top are the strategic priorities. So as I mentioned, that's really the lens through which we interpret our data and the assessment center data. And you can select or deselect priorities as they're important for that position. What we're looking at here is cumulative readiness. So this is creating our talent pools for us. This is telling us, based on all this information that we've gathered, who do we have that's ready now, could be ready in 6 months, potentially ready in 12 months, versus those that might be on a much longer development track, those that are not necessarily ready at this time. And then the second screen or report that I'd like to demonstrate here is the 9-box grid. So by using this type of data and integrating this with the software and with algorithms, we're able to populate this 9-box grid where we can show performance versus potential. So it's a very objective way to look at the 9-box grid, and of course it's much less time intensive in terms of putting this together. Typically this process would take days, many hours of senior leaders' time to compile this 9-box. And our software with the algorithms that we're using is able to present this automatically for decision makers.
Hey, Christy, one thing to point out real quickly with regard to the 9-box is one of the key elements of this is that it does remove any emotional bias that may be associated with the particular employee. So if you think somebody should be a high achiever just because your impression of them, it kind of removes that. And conversely, if you already have an opinion made on somebody that there's no way they're going to succeed, this removes that element from the equation.
Yep, that's a great point. That is something that we see commonly with our clients, that they maybe have their top 2 or 3 candidates selected, they're ready to move forward, make a decision, and there's someone in the leadership team that's a little uncertain of that decision, would like a little bit more information to verify it, and so they use the simulation assessment, and oftentimes, the results might be different than who they had chosen as the successor. I'll go back here to the slides and move to the third step, which is facilitating the talent review. So this is really where we want to be spending the majority of our time. And of course, there's numerous goals to be accomplished in this process, and the actual steps that an organization can take can vary. But there's a number of different components here that should be included. So that includes evaluating current performance or past performance, determining potential is a key component here, and then of course determining readiness to accomplish future business objectives. And with the assessment program in place, this discussion can really turn from evaluating performance to determining who those high potential employees are, who the successors should be, and using that stakeholder time more strategically to focus on developing those high potential employees and developing successors for future positions. And then here we are at the last step, so the talent pools and the development plans. And though this is the last step in the process, it's really the start of the conversation. So now that we've aligned our talent with our strategic goals and we've identified our talent pools, this is where we should be spending the majority of our time in determining how do we either retain or develop the employees depending on where they fall in terms of the talent pool. So for example, With the leaders that are ready now, our focus should really be more on retention and retention strategies. So this can include things like invitation to special or highly visible projects, increased access to executives, maybe mentorship programs for them, or increased flexibility at work. And then these leaders that fall into our ready at 6 month category, paradoxically, this is really the individuals that need the least amount of development is really where we should be spending the most amount of our time and our resources in developing them. Because these are the employees that are likely to be our high potentials that are strong in difficult to develop areas, but have work to do on more developable dimensions. These are the individuals that we are likely to see the most potential from them in the near future. Andy, anything you'd want to add to this before we move to questions?
No, I think you've done a great job this kind of giving an overview of really the strengths and reasons and the power of why you want to start measuring potential versus the performance process. So thank you very much on that.
Absolutely. Andy, have we had any questions that have come in during this time?
Yeah, if anybody has, we've had a few that have come in, and just to let everybody know, if you have a question, there's a chat function. Just type your question in, and I'll get these read, and we'll get Christy to answer these for us. But the first one that came in, it says, you're showing on your particular assessment business strategies. We utilize competencies. Is there a way to link the competencies to your business strategies?
Yeah, that's a great question, and a question we hear very often. So competencies, essentially the business strategies that we're using are a competency framework, or they're a way to organize the skills and the necessary behaviors. So with a company that has existing competencies, we can certainly map on our behaviors to those competencies. We've actually done that, and that's documented already, and we're happy to help in that process as well. And in our software, we have an option called configuration, wherein clients are able to go in and say, given conceptual similarity between the behaviors and the skills that we're measuring and the competencies that they're interested in using, they can actually change that terminology in the report. So, for example, we work a lot in healthcare, and increasing customer satisfaction is not as relevant. They would like that to be increasing patient satisfaction. So they're able to modify that strategy to reflect that language, and the same is true of behaviors.
Fantastic, thank you. And kind of on a related question that came in, they're wanting to know, how does your approach, how does this differ from other assessments that are on the market?
That's a really great question. So this approach is pretty radically different than most assessments that are on the market. So when we look at the majority of assessments on the market, we're talking about psychometric assessments, that might be personality assessments, cognitive ability, maybe some situational judgment tests that are labeled as skill development or skills assessments. But really, with all of those assessments, not only are the majority of them self-reports, so we're asking the individual to report what they would do or what they do believe or who they are, but we're also not necessarily measuring their actual skills. So in our simulation assessment, we're measuring behaviors. We have trained leadership consultants that are going in and they're observing those skills and they're rating them on standardized scales. So it's moving beyond that self-report, and it's looking at their actual behaviors in action, which is telling oftentimes tells a very different picture than sometimes people will self-report, or something that we can get from a forced choice item that we see in most of the assessments on the market today.
Fantastic, thank you. Another one that came through, it said you were showing, make sure I understand this. Okay. Oh, it says you're showing group reporting, but does it also break it down more on an individual basis? So if we're working with an employee, can we tell them what they need to do to improve?
Absolutely. So I didn't go into the individual reports. The individual reports, there's lots of data in there. There's a very similar graph in terms of graphing performance versus potential. And then within that graph, whereas before in the group report you saw the individuals were in that graph, what you'll actually see is the behaviors or the skills, so that you can concretely look at what are the behaviors you're skills that this person needs to improve, and you can see very easily where they fall in terms of performance versus potential with those various different skills. And then there's a number of other analytics reported that provide more information in depth about what areas of those skills do they really need to improve.
Okay, fantastic. I had another one that came through that they're asking, they're kind of in the early stages of looking at this, but they're wanting to know, how is succession planning different from like replacement planning?
Right. So replacement planning to me, and of course this might vary from organization, but oftentimes replacement planning is more reactive. So you heard someone's leaving and you have to quickly react and find someone to put in that place. Where succession planning is much more of a proactive approach. It's looking ahead. You don't necessarily know that anyone's leaving at any certain time. You don't have definitive timelines of when a position maybe needs to be filled, but you want to start developing those talent pools internally so when that time comes, you're ready and you don't have to be reactive in that situation.
Fantastic, thank you. I've got another couple that came through here. I guess this may be more directed at me. It says we talked about talked about CEOs putting the wrong CEO in place, and said they've heard costs all over the board with regard to a bad CEO hire. Do we have any estimates that we've done? Christy, do you have anything on that? I know, through what I found, we don't do our own research on that. We rely on other organizations to do that type of research. I've seen estimates as high as 1.2 million for a bad CEO hire because of everything that they're involved in. It included, obviously, their salary costs. It included the cost of lost sales and retraining. And then there's another one that I got for another organization. They were very, very specific. They had the cost for the true one-year cost for somebody who's making $150,000 a year. They had it down to $369,600. So they were very precise, which I found interesting. They talked about the severance costs. They talked about the recruiting cost involved. And stuff you couldn't calculate, like the board time, the board interview time for the board interviewing a new CEO. They talked about the salary and related cost, for benefits and things like that. And then obviously the training and learning curve costs. So they were very, very precise, which I once again found very interesting at just under $370,000. But I think it's going to vary, obviously, the cost of a bad hire at any level. There is a cost associated with it. There is a time cost that's associated because you're having to interview. You're having to take time out of your day from doing your duties, from doing performance reviews. You have to pull yourself away from that to interview some people. And then obviously too, if it's a crucial seat, your company could be losing revenue. So anything, Christy, you want to add to that?
No, like you mentioned, we're not collecting data on that. We're relying on others' research for that type of data. But I know anecdotally, in speaking with a number of our clients, that there's so many factors that likely aren't taken into account with these types of statistics, making me think that they're really underestimates. So just kind of the stress and the wear and tear that it causes on other employees that are asked to pick up the slack, or things that are slipping through the crack, things that are difficult to measure when someone's leaving and you're in that reactive mode. I think that the estimates that you provided, they seem accurate, but I would caution that they're probably an underestimate because there's so many factors that are just difficult to quantify, especially in that situation.
Fantastic, thank you. Had another one that came in here. It says they're considering using the 9-box exercise through the, going through the calibration exercises. They've never done it before. Do you have estimates on how long putting together an individual 9-box takes, and then an approximate time on how long for the group 9-box?
Right. So I would say that process, so from start to end, we're talking probably weeks, if not months, in terms of collecting those ratings and calibrating the managers. So part of my role here at Pinsight is calibrating our team of leadership experts that are making the ratings of our participants. And I know that that's not a short process. So it's a very, very time-intensive process. And these are individuals that this is their background. This is their educational training and their experience. So we're certainly not starting from scratch, and it's still a very lengthy process to just talk about the calibration. So I imagine it's upwards of weeks and months, depending on how standardized and how structured that process is.
Yeah, I can only speak from experience. The quicker portion for me was obviously always the individual one. Where it got long and lengthy is once you get pulled into a room with the other managers who are also providing their feedback, and you try to populate that overall box with all the employees. You know, disagreements take time to get through, and opinions take time to get through. So it was a long process, and I will admit I didn't always look forward to that time of year.
I appreciate your honesty there.
One more that came through, getting back to the individual report, it's asking, are there training, does it indicate training-wise what they need, and then how do you determine, you know, how are you determining if they have training needs, how are you determining how long?
Right.
It says they're referring to, you have the ready in 12, ready in 6. What determines that?
Yep, so those are algorithms based on some of the research we've done here internally, as well as some of the research literature we've consulted. So it's a combination of those 4 factors I referenced earlier, being current skill level, motivation, learning agility, and the ease of development for that particular skill. So using those 4 components, we've created algorithms and then of course validated those as well to determine the readiness estimates. So that's how we're determining readiness. In regards to the training needs, so certainly in the individual report you'll be able to see where an individual's strengths are, what their training needs are based on the current performance as well as their potential. And then also in the group report there is a training needs, there's a needs analysis graph that outlines for all of your leaders what are the training needs for all of those leaders, how many leaders do you have that have each need, and then how difficult or easy is that particular skill that the group has training needs for. So there's quite a bit of information available in the reports to determine the training needs, and I'd say that's often how our clients use this as kind of that first diagnostic step to determine what are those training needs so that they can then tailor their leadership development or their succession planning models around that.
Just one of the things that I've always found interesting with our tool, and when I was first sitting down with Dr. Martin Lanik, who developed this, was how we how we really looked at the particular training needs in in the length of time, the ease of developing or the difficulty of developing. And could you kind of talk a little bit, like a planning, how long it takes to teach someone how to be a better planner versus, speaking with charisma?
Right. Yeah. So the planning is typically it's based on the research both that we've done and the research literature we've consulted. Planning is an easier skill to develop. Someone can pick that up. They can learn planning in a relatively short amount of time, depending on, of course, their current skill level with that particular behavior. However, something like speaking with charisma or influencing others, some of the interpersonal skills that are often crucial for leadership take much more time for an individual to develop. So we account for that in those readiness estimates. If someone has a training need for planning and a training need for influencing others, then the individual that has that training need for influencing others, it's going to take them a little bit more time just because that is a more complex skill for them to learn.
Fantastic. Well, we've got about 1 more minute left here. Any additional questions? Christy, have you had any coming your way? I think I've covered all of them here.
I think you've captured all of the questions I've seen come in.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, let me go. Thank you everybody for attending. We really do appreciate your time. We hope you got a lot out of this. And if you have any additional questions after the fact, please feel free to reach out to us. We're always available. I'll do one more shameless plug. If you're in Atlanta and would like to come to Disrupt HR Atlanta on February 25th, or if you'd like to speak, we're also looking for a few more speakers for our event. So please reach out, contact us. Would love to meet a lot of you face-to-face, get you involved with Disrupt HR. But once again, thank you for attending. Let us know what we can do to assist you in the future. Christy, thank you.
Thank you, Andy. And thank you to everyone joining. Have a great day.